Hello and welcome back to the worst Warmachine channel on the internet. I'm Dorian and this is time for another Dorian Weekly. Now, for this one here, my patrons have picked a topic as they do, and they selected negative play experiences in Warmachine. This is actually a topic I've really wanted to talk about for a long time. I keep on throwing it up on the poll and I keep on picking other things that finally the patrons gave in and let me actually cover this one that I wanted to talk about. Now, what we're going to be doing as we go through this is, first of all, I'm just going to quickly capture what is a negative play experience in Warmachine. What does that phrase even mean? After that, we're going to go through examples. I listed out here the top ones I could think of what negative play experiences are. I'm sure that there'll be some ones that are coming like straight to your head before I even get to the definition. Like, oh yeah, this is bad, this is bad. And maybe once I finish everything, you're like, whoa, you didn't even cover this. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there, and it's actually a very important topic to be covering. So again, that's why I want to be talking about it. So I think the very first thing we need to cover then is, what am I talking about a negative play experience? Well, what I'm talking about with that is that we play this game for different reasons. It really depends who you are. Maybe you're playing this game because you just like rolling dice and drinking beer. Maybe you're a person that likes seeing all the different tactical options that were used on the table. Maybe you're very competitive and you're like, I'm going to come here and I'm going to defeat you. Whatever your reasoning is for coming to this game, you are investing resources, both time and money, and expecting to get something from it. So, I mean, really talking about what's all going into this, you spent money to go and buy these things. You spent the time to go and build them and maybe even paint them. You had to go and learn the meta. You had to then go and craft up your list. You had to drive into the store. You had to go and set up a game. You set up all your models, and then poof, that's the payoff. What's going to be coming on after that? Was it worth it? And if it's really like, nope, that's what a negative play experience is. So I'm sure we've all had these moments, and I'm trying to keep this one fairly broad because, again, there could be lots of reasons why these things come up. So let's talk about example number one, which is a little bit of a cop-out, but it's going to be bad dice. This is something where it happens to everybody, right? Everybody's had that time where you came to the game, your dice just failed you, and you're just like, why? Why did I even come today? There's nothing I could do because I had such bad luck. Now, the first thing I want to really talk about here is the idea that this is nobody's fault. This is nothing that you or your opponent did. It's just a game of luck, and this is the way it goes, right? We could talk about like, oh, well, what if we use a different system that was always like mathematically set or card-based or something where you had more control? There's always going to be some sort of random element to this, realistically, and we just got to realize that it's going to be a bell curve. Normally, everything's going to be following somewhat normal, but sometimes you see extremes. Sometimes you're going to be seeing a lot of extremes, but in general, that's not going to happen. So will this be a bad play experience, a negative play experience? Yes, but hopefully it's something you can just take yourself back and be like, okay, this is ridiculous. Let's just accept how ridiculous this is and try and laugh at it, as opposed to seeing how you're like, oh, well, this is like the spirits and bad luck and voodoo like working against me. I need to get rid of these dice and get new dice. I gotta make sure next time I come here I brush my hair the other way if I had hair. You know, like, it's nothing you can really control. So this is one that I want to throw in there because it's a nice easy one that we've always felt, you know, if you're a gamer, this has come up and it kind of like just teases you the idea of what a negative play experience is, but it's kind of a nombo, really, because it's nothing we can do about. Just accept it. The next one I have on here is going to be fast end. Now, what I mean by that is we've had those games where you go in, you've done all this prep work, all this investment, boom, game's done. Was that worth it to you? Probably not, you know. Spent an hour driving to the store, you play for 5 minutes, and then you got to drive an hour back. That doesn't seem worthwhile. One of the things I always hate is that years ago, I had a new player come to a tournament. Here I am, the press ganger, super happy to have them joining the meta. First round, Sloan. Assassinated, game over, either bottom of one or top of two. Okay. I calmed them down. Round two, Now they're up against Lilith 2, which pretty much did the same thing with Ravagors. Boom, dead. Then you leave the tournament. I never see them again. And, I mean, you could say like, oh, well, they just gave up too early. But that really was, again, this idea, this negative play experience. Something where you're going into this and being like, okay, I've invested this time to get something from it. And the game's done. Maybe all you did was that very first turn where you deployed and you ran up. And then they killed you. And you could be saying things like, oh, you could learn the threat ranges and blah, blah, blah. But usually the people that are affected by these types of negative play experiences the most are the newer players that don't see these things coming. And so it could just hit them and be done, and that's it. So if you're a person that this has happened to, this is probably where you should be asking those questions like, okay, what are these threat ranges? I need to make sure this doesn't happen, right? I mean, if in that example I gave, if in the first game, like, oh, wow, there's some long threat ranges in here, game 2, what are your threat ranges? And try and do these types of things, then they would have been safeguarded from it. But I mean, if it's too late and it's done, it's kind of too late and it's done. You kind of got to learn these things. So on the flip side, if you're the person that's threatening with this, you might want to be realizing who you're playing against. And if you're just going to be like sniping out a seal from downtown, maybe don't do that, because then you won't see that seal anymore. The next one I have on here is tricked. Now, tricked is a real negative connotation, and you might not be intending to do this as the player with the trick. A lot of times this is called like a gotcha play. So an example of this could be like countercharge or vengeance or any one of these type of triggered abilities really in the game where if your opponent does something, you get to do this and it really changes things. So here's a great example. Your opponent went in. They're playing very carefully. They're like, okay, what's your threat range? Okay, I'll keep this all out. Now I'll just be running this here to contest your zone. Oh, you trigger countercharge. Oh, now your Toro can get on my caster. Well, boom, I guess this game's done now. It kind of like falls in with those fast ends, but it's because you feel like it's a trick, right? It's not just something like, this was not worth it to me because of the time difference. This is like, oh my God, there's now like, how many things do I have to know about, right? Like I saw your things, I knew your threat ranges, but now there's all these extra abilities and interactions I have to memorize too. And you can also kind of feel, again, tricked. It was kind of a gotcha, like, oh, you didn't see it, and now I got you, and now I win. But as the player that got gotcha'd by it, you do feel tricked. You're like, oh, come on, that's so cheap. And now what? Now the game's over? Like, these things, sometimes they're not, like, immediately over. Like, I talked about the Toro that can now get on the caster, but maybe it's vengeance, right? Maybe it's like, well, I'll take one random shot. I made sure everything was out of the threat ranges. Oh, that triggered vengeance? Well, that might not mean that your caster's dead or something like that, but they get such a huge alpha from that vengeance extra 3-inch threat that now you're gonna lose, right? Maybe they charge in, destroy a couple of heavies, a critical solo, whatever it is, and the game flops so far one way, you can't really come back from it. So these things are also negative play experiences. Now, again, as a person who got tricked by it, you have to be aware of these things, looking out for them, trying to ask what those interactions are. Again, flipping it to the other side, if you're the person with these, it's probably better for you to let them know, right? When I first started playing, gotchas was a huge thing. You'd walk into stuff and it was just feel bads everywhere. Now we are more of a community where if people walk into these things like, just so you know, I have countercharge, or just so you know, this thing has dodge, so if you miss it once, I'm gonzo, so you better make sure you hit, right? Like, all these types of things, you can get more benefit from having it be a gotcha, except for that negative play experience. And again, if we do that and the player never comes back, that's a bigger loss to the community. All right, next one here, I put it down as lying. Now, this is just kind of like the extreme wording of it, just like how the last one was like tricked rather than gotcha'd. And it kind of, again, links in with the last one, but it's slightly different, right? So let's say, for example, they're setting up, they're trying to pick what objectives they're going to use, and they're like, oh, okay, well, do you have any stealth? No, none of my models have stealth. Then they go in, they start taking a shot, and they're like, oh, you miss. What do you mean I miss? Well, I actually have this rule on here where if I'm in concealment, then I'm going to be getting prowl trigger and I get to be stealthy. So I didn't have stealth, but because of prowl, you see what I'm saying, right? And these things come up and they didn't exactly lie, right? When somebody went and asked the question, do you have stealth? That's a true answer to say no. This model does not have stealth. They have prowl. These are two different things. Another thing could be like, what is your threat range? Oh, well, my jack is speed 5. I just have a reach range of 1, so I could be charging from 5 to 8, reach 1, so I threat 9 inches. Oh, okay, I'll keep my things out of the 9. Oh, I didn't mention that I also have this threat range and this and this and this, so I actually threat 14 inches. Again, they told the truth to it, but in a way that now it's going to be basically like a gotcha and can just vastly turn the game around. And from a competitive standpoint, it is in your benefit to be doing these things. However, from a negative gameplay experience, this is what turns people away and makes them like, yeah, screw this game. I didn't come in here to be a scholar and have to learn every single rule. So if you're not going to be honest with me, I'm out of here. And, you'll have the people like, well, of course I was honest with you. It's just realized it's a negative play experience. And if you're asking those questions, maybe sometimes if you're playing against somebody new, just be like, and there's no spells or abilities that add to this. And if you're the person being ready to gotcha, just be ready that you might be making your community one person smaller. All right, next one I have on here is can't hit and can't hurt. And what I'm really talking about here is for the big extremes where you're pushing defense or armor extremely high so that your opponent can do things, right? They can go in there and they can roll dice, but your defense is so high that it's like they can't do anything. Really, them rolling dice, the odds of them actually hitting are not worth the risk of the time being added that is now going to be making them clock. Or the same thing for armor. They're like, yeah, get in there. And like, whoa, your armor's how high? Like, why do I even make attacks? Why do I even do this game? Again, trying to balance all these things in. I spent all these times, did all these things. And now, sure, I can roll dice, but my odds of doing things, unless I'm just rolling all 6s and getting lucky, I'm not going to really get anything done on the table and get slaughtered. Yeah, screw this game. And again, from a competitive nature, yeah, you want to do those rocket men with Ashlyn. You want to be doing those carver lists, stacking up the armor and all those types of things because they're strong, right? Doing these skews is something that's powerful in the game. However, it's also a negative play experience. And so for this one, for the person that is having the feel bad, you might want to learn about these things, find some ways that you can get around those skews, try and build them into your list. If you're a person on the other side, you might want to warn them about, like, just so you know, when we're doing this list pairing, this one here, we're talking like defense 19, and in this one here, we're talking like armor 24, 26, maybe even higher, right? Like, let your opponent know if you feel like they aren't aware of these things. And privateer press, maybe stop putting these extremes in there like this. Just saying, you very much went and made sure like, oh, no knockdown tough isn't going to be a thing anymore. And then you did it again and started bringing even higher defense and armor too. So don't build that into your game. So there's a three-way blame here, responsibility for trying to control this one. And again, I'm not telling you that you're not allowed to be playing skews in your lists, but be prepared that this would be a negative play experience if it's just like, boom, haha, you don't get to do anything. All right, next thing I want to be talking about is being controlled. And there's different ways of being controlled. Maybe you're an awful person like me that likes playing Magnus 2 and locking things down and being, haha, you can't move or doing anything. Maybe you're something else like you're a Haley 2 being, okay, those things there, you have to forfeit either your movement or your action. Or maybe you're something else where like, okay, you can make attacks, but then after you do that first one, you're going to become stationary, right? One of those types of lists. Those types of things that control the board, or we could be talking about like the Krugers, all these different types of things. The player doing it feels smart, right? Like, I'm controlling things. I'm smart. I'm powerful. I trapped you in here, and now that while I have this, I can try and win on scenario, go for assassination, attrition, whatever your game plan is. But your feeling is just part of like, hey, I didn't go for these other things. I specifically put effort into control. Again, much like, the last one where we talked about where the person having that negative play experience, just like we're like, well, the defense is so high, the armor is so high, I can't do anything. At least in those cases, they'd have a chance to roll dice and be like, nope, I didn't roll double 6s. In a lot of these cases with the control, you just can't do anything, right? With the Magnus 2, you just can't go anywhere. With the Haley, sure, you can choose if you're going to be forfeiting your movement or your action. Either way, you're not going to be able to move up and make those attacks you wanted. Or Kruger, I go and move you around and TK and slow you down, and yeah, sure, you can go and move models and stuff. They're not getting to me, and then I'm going to get to you next turn. So again, this is a negative play experience where if this is a person where this is happening to you, you can look into these things, learn them, try and find the ways the counters spread out, try and limit the things that can actually affecting you. But if you're a person doing it again, you probably want to be warning your opponent, especially if you don't see it coming, and maybe don't use these against new players. All right, next one I want to talk about is No Chance. Now, this is another extreme name for this category, but what I'm talking about here is almost like no choice or no good choices. What I'm really talking about here are things like these strange bedfellows type lists. Things where it's like Aurora, the Angels, the Archons, Gas Before, they get in there, they zip up first turn, and like, okay, now it's your turn. What are you going to do? Well, I have two choices. One, I can move forward and this super fast, hard-hitting army that has flying and parry is going to go in and scalpel out whatever part of my army they want so that it's such a crippling alpha, I can't do anything about it. Or I can stay back out of your threat range and then you win on scenario. So some of these things like this, especially the ones here where they have such a long threat range, right? At least things were like guns. Sometimes those are like, well, I can run and try and get to cover and stuff. It really like the long threats where there's, I guess, range will throw in there too, or the combat, anything like that where your opponent just feels like I have no good choices here. Again, this is not like the skew where I can roll dice, but it's probably not a good likelihood. It's not the controlling thing where, you know, I can do stuff, but it's really not doing stuff. This is kind of a different taste on that where I can do something, but every option is a bad option, right? I can either move things in for you to kill, or I can stay back and die. And I think a very important note to be adding to this is that sometimes these are valid and sometimes they aren't, but they're perceived the same. So what I mean by that is that a new player coming in that doesn't understand the options that they have available to them, well, might see this. Like, I mean, for competitive players, I think the Strange Bedfellows one is the one that really calls this out. But for a new player, you might feel this against a lot of fair armies. You're like, oh man, there's so much synergy. You're so powerful. It doesn't matter what I do. You're just going to crush me type thing. And that's a perceived type thing, right? They don't understand the outs and the different ways they'd be trying to deal with it. The Strange Bedfellow players say that to me, like, oh, well, if you just did this and this and this, it'd be way better. But it sure doesn't feel like that. So the way to be dealing with this one is as that player that is feeling like there's nothing to do, just be like, can we pause a clock? Because it seems like there's nothing I can do. And maybe use these things as a learning experience, being like, okay, we could play this game as a game and being like, I beat you. And if this is a tournament, that obviously has to be one of the outcomes. But if it's in a casual game, let's just slow down here. This is feeling really negative. Is there actually something I should be doing here? Is this a list design issue? Is this a deploy issue? Is there something I can be doing in this situation that's not going to be getting me crushed? Because I feel right now that I'm hopeless. And that can now have that development, right? Where like, oh, well, actually you can do this and this and this, and be giving them hope and strengthening them as a player. And again, keeping them in a community. Even if it's in a tournament. Okay, look. I feel that I can't win. I feel that you're going to be crushing me. I could just give you the win and then go get a beer and probably go home and not show up. How about this? I'm going to give you the win. There you go. Competitive player, here's your win. Now, for the rest of our allotment of time here, can you teach me how I should be doing this? What are my best options? What are my options as I go through these turns, right? So, as the player, be ready to be turning these games into a learning experience where if you feel there are no options, learn those options. And if you're the person applying that to them, you can see from their eyes and their expressions is like, they're feeling hopeless. They're feeling like there's nothing they can do. Maybe same thing, right? Maybe try and turn this thing more into the learning experience. Be like, hey, are you okay? Like, what are your thoughts here? What do you think you're going to be trying to do? Because I can help you out with a bit of this, right? Be ready to do some of those things. All right, next one here is just plain attitude. So these last ones here, like the first ones are kind of more like the play styles and stuff like that. This is more so now getting into the attitudes for the last few here. And the first one is just attitude, right? You might be going into a game and it's a nice balanced game. There's no huge skews. It's a nice back and forth as far as like the play goes. But this person's attitude, right? Like whenever they get some bad luck, they're screaming, they're swearing, throwing their dice, you know, they're whatever it is, that attitude is just way out of line. And you're like, this game, if I was playing against somebody else, probably would have been fantastic. But because of this person, screw this. And that's again such a hard one, right? So to them, they might think like this is a negative play experience. I'm not going to do this, right? If I walk in and see this player, I don't even want to play that day, right? Because the chance of me having to play them again, it's not even worth it. And if this person's like this here, there's probably more. You know what? Screw this. I'm going to go play something else. I got an Xbox at home. I don't need to deal with this, right? So if you're that person, maybe just stop them again and be like, are you okay, man? Like, it seems like you're really upset. I'm just trying to have a chill game here type thing. And on the other side, if you're the person that's just like angry and upset, same thing. Try and realize that it's not just your day, that maybe like you had a rough day, right? Maybe that morning you got a flat tire, you lost your job, whatever, like my day sucks. Well, realize that by you having this attitude, you're making other days, like for other people, suck for them as well, and doing that negative play experience and really harming the community. You need to either just chill or leave. That'd be a lot better than just staying there and making things worse for everybody. The next one I want to be talking about here is too technical. So this is the person where it kind of goes back to the whole trick/lie thing, but to them, they just want a very technical game. Look, we're in a game of rules. I have a rule book, so let's just follow the rules, okay? And where this really comes, though, up in as a negative play experience is that when somebody does something that is not really within the rules, but is also not really a big deal. So, for example, oh, you are actually supposed to be using this in your maintenance phase. I know you already allocated, so we're really past that, but yeah, go ahead and do that thing. Like, it doesn't change anything in the game. Technically, you've moved past it and it's too late, but it's all right. The other one would be like allocating focus, right? Like, okay, you forgot to allocate focus because you were so excited to do this, but I mean, whatever, right? Like, there's no decision points I had to stop you from doing that. You just made a sequencing error. Go ahead. Or maybe you went and moved a model, right? And you're like, oh, this is the first model of 10 that moves. Oh, if I do this one, then that's going to get in the way of these. I'll move it over here instead. And I'm like, whoa. What's your movement? First you moved here. That's going to use up 8 inches of your 10 for running. So you can only go 2 inches out of the way now. Wait a second, right? I could have ran anywhere here. Maybe, but you moved there. These are all things that technically they're correct, but what is that adding to the game? I'm sure to them, they feel like, hey, this is a game of chess. You know, there's rules, you follow the rules, and the winner wins. But it really applies that negative play experience. Now, to me, what I would suggest is that if you're the player running into this, learn who those players are, because I found that those people, that's just the way that they are. That the idea of like the other one, like, hey man, can you try and ease up? Doesn't work on them. Maybe they're a person that came from Magic the Gathering or whatever background, but like rules are rules, and trying to humanize it, I mean, like, come on, let's just relax, doesn't work. What I find instead is identify those people at the start of the game, know that I have to be on my game, right? Right from the very beginning, I am going to be a person that's going to be held accountable for every little mistake, so I have to take an extra second every little movement I do and make sure it's the right thing. And really, that's not a bad thing, right? It's going to be making you a better player to be putting that effort in. If you are, again, that other person, the person that is being the super technical one, maybe make sure that you warn your opponents about it. It's like, hey, just so you know, I've been told that I'm too technical, but I just like a really clean game. So if we could just make sure that everything is 100% clean by the rules, that's what I'm looking for in this game. And then they know from the very beginning, all right, there will be no takebacks. This is the type of thing that we're going to be playing here. All right. Next one here is I'm going to be putting as the last one, and that is going to be called the Tryhard. Now, this Tryhard topic can go lots of different ways, but basically you're just pushing something way too hard no matter what element this is in. Maybe you're a person that's such a tryhard for a competition. And all the way through the game, you're like, yeah, I'm going to kill that. Oh, man, I'm going to farm these for these points. Okay, yeah, I killed that thing. Got that jack. Get him out of here. You know, like, I'm up on these points. I'm up on these control points. Like, it almost feels like a comic, but sometimes you see this happening as people are, like, excited because it's their first tournament, or they're just that type of person, or maybe, you know, like, they're just having a great day, and they're just loving life, but it's coming out as all this emotion. Sometimes it's a tryhard for other stuff too, right? Maybe you're a tryhard that's trying to make everything feel nice and safe and fun for everybody. So you make sure that at the very beginning, like, okay, I want us to have a really great game. So just tell me, what are the various things that you don't like? I'll tell you the things that I don't like, and I'll make sure that everything's nice and easy. You can stop me anytime. You can kind of see where, like, in their heart, they're coming this from the right direction, but as somebody on the other side, they're like, buddy, shut up. Let's just play. I realize that you're trying to be, you know, the good person here, but it's not necessary. Let's just move on. Let's just go. And it's a hard thing to do because maybe you're doing this try hard thing because you are super excited or you're just really emotional about something, but it can actually make things worse. And it's really hard for you to self-identify that, right? Me coming in, if I go in with my Malorian personality, like, hey, how's it going? They're like, calm down. What's your problem? Just chill out. I don't need you yelling and stuff. Back in my fantasy days, we had one guy that just loved orcs. I love orcs. This guy really loved orcs. And every single time he'd actually use his wah ability for them, he would scream it out and the entire place would hear it. And some people loved that. Some people hated it with their very essence. And so it was very hard sometimes to balance that as they're playing. As they would play them, like, oh my God, not this again. If they scream, I'm going to freaking lose it. Whereas there's others like, yeah, let's do this. I love it. And it's so hard for people to really understand that. So I think the best thing to do is that if you're the person being affected by this, either just be like, look, they're having a blast, and that's fine as long as it seems like everyone's loving it. I'm just going to let this slide. I'm not going to be the one person like yucking their yum type thing. But if it does seem like it really bugs you and bugs other people's too, maybe just stop them like, okay, I see what you're trying to do, but let's just bring this one down. Just so you know, I'm just here for the game, man. You know, that's all I'm for. We're all cool. It's all good. I just want to play the game. And if you're the person on the other side, if you're doing that and you glance across and you're like, ooh, they're not having a good time, maybe draw that one back and don't, you know, you don't feel like you're trying hard, but that's how it's being perceived. So maybe claw that one back. We're through all my examples. We've gone through all this. So what is the summation of all this? The summation is that there are negative play experiences out there. Some of these are luck-based. Some of these are based on game design. Some of these are just basic attitude and how people are. And it's really important that as you go into these things, to have that empathy for the other person. We'd all talked about how there's different reasons why different people play. And so it's good to identify that in yourself. It's good to know that when I come to the game, I'm trying to do this because I want to X. I want to be showing off my cool painted models. I want to be crushing my opponent. I want to just be like having like cool times and lots of beers and that type of stuff. Whatever it is, that's awesome. I'm glad you're having a great time. At the same time, make sure it's the same on the other side. And also realize that some of these things are very much under your control. A lot of people might see to me that I am the awful Magnus 2 player of the group, and I have been a blight upon my community for a decade. However, I do try and control that when I can. There's been awful times where I've been like in my super competitive mode, gone into a game, you're like, bam, yeah, feet, you can't do anything, score, I win, goodbye. And then I realized like, that was awful. Like, that was not a good game. And so what I've done then is I've now assessed myself, known that that's a negative play experience that I put on others, and now I kind of gauge it onto the person I play. If you're a person that you're a veteran, you know how to counter these things, I'm not holding back. That Magnus control feat's coming in. I know you know about it. You should know now how to deal with it. Let's do this. If I'm playing against somebody else new, I'll warn them. I'll let them know. Maybe I'll even use things so I'm only feeding on some stuff. Maybe I'll doing things where it's like, okay, it's not that you can't come into me, but you can't run away. I love doing that sometimes. Like, your caster can't move towards your board edge. You're stuck in here with me, right? You can change things like that. There's also been times where I just don't even use Magnus's feat. You know, if I'm against somebody that's relatively new and they're just not going to have the answers or the knowledge to be dealing with Magnus, then I don't use that feat, and I just use my usual skill that I've gathered up over my decade of play to just try and play the game that way. And you know what? Maybe I will now lose the game because I didn't feat. But you know what I did do? I kept that person in the community. And I think with all these, that's going to be the main thing here. It's one thing to look at all these negative play experiences and be like, oh, this is all about feelings. Why should I care about your feelings? Whatever, just grow up. Well, it's not really all about that. It's really about the community. And if we can find this way to make this game fun, well, one, we're not going to lose those players as they go to something else. And two, it's going to draw more people in, right? The more fun everybody's having, the more people are going to be coming into play, right? Instead of that person leaving and never coming back, they're telling their friends, like, oh yeah, I went to a game, it was great, this happened and this happened, it was so cool. It turns out my opponent had this, but they warned me about it, so I had to play around it, right? Like, that's the difference here. And that's the thing where, like, if you don't make sure you guard against it, that can kill your community. Whereas if you really understand it and control it appropriately, then all of a sudden that grows your community, and boom, it's just fantastic. So there you go. There's negative play experiences. If you have any comments on these, please put it down below. I bet there's other examples you can think of that I didn't cover. Otherwise, again, I want to thank my patrons. You guys are awesome. I have on here my content overlord Darrell. I have my manipulators Adrian, Dorian, Jordan, Sloth Monarchy, and you know what? The regular supporters as well, you know, like Andrew, Daniel, David, Jason, Nicholas, Samuel, Sean, and Curio. I mean, thank you all for supporting me. Hopefully you're getting the benefit from this. Then I'm hoping that I'm bringing the community with this. And if not, let me know. Message me. Be like, you know what, Malorian, I wish you'd be talking more about that, because that's what I want to do. I want to be giving you what you want. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later. Bye.